Hi, hi. Hello, and welcome to Plattform and Bergen Kunsthall. My name is Steinar Sekkingstad. I'm the curator here at the Kunsthall. Um, Yesterday, we opened two new exhibitions, one by Adelita Husni Bey called Maktspill, um, and the other large comprehensive show of works by Simone Fattal, which is the occasion here today. We're very pleased to have with us Simone, and also together with Barbara Casavecchia, um, for a conversation. Um, Now, the exhibition is. We are very proud and pleased to be able to present this comprehensive exhibition in Bergen Kunsthall. It's an exhibition that spans almost the whole of Simone's career, from the very early works from the early 70s. The earliest pieces are from 1969 and all the way up to the present. And it covers ceramic sculptures, which is maybe what to many she is most known for, but it also, as I said, early paintings, photography, collage, watercolors. The only film work by Simone Fattal is in the show, and also a presentation of books, which they are all published by Post Apollo Press, which is a publishing house that Simone Fattal started in the early 80s in California. So that's just as a very short introduction to what the exhibition contains. And a few words of introduction also for Barbara Casavecchia. She is a freelance writer and independent curator based in Milan, where she teaches at the Brera Art Academy. She's a contributing editor for Frieze, and her article and essays has appeared in many magazines such as Art Agenda, Art Review, Della Repubblica, Flash Art, Moose, Nero, Spike, so on and so on. She's also a curator. Maybe you can mention only one of the recent ones. In 2018, she curated the exhibition Susan Hiller Social Facts at the OGR in Turin. Very happy to have you both here, and thank you all for coming, and also a welcome to anyone watching online, and also making you all aware that we are streaming this conversation live, so there are a couple of cameras in the room. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Steiner. Thanks, everybody, for this invitation. It's actually wonderful to have a chance to come to such a distant city for me, and for such a lovely occasion, which is having a conversation with Simone. So the exhibition in itself had such a beautiful title, Fix Your Gaze on Saturn Rings. It brought me to a quotation which refers to Simone's work, which I really liked, because it's from this text by Khaled El-Najjar, titled The Spirit Crossing the Clay, and it's also been translated from the Arabic by Etel Adnan, who is Simone's life partner, and a poet, an artist, etc., etc. And it says, "That is the way I see the figurines sculpted by Simone Fattal, as controversial as Noah's Ark, as real and imaginary at the same time. Symbolically, they look like Noah's Ark, which has preserved that which is primitive in us, something that belongs to an antediluvian age. Like this ark, they appear to be legendary and thus come close to the dynamic reality of history much more than what we call objective reality," which I think it's really, well, besides being beautifully written and translated, of course, it's this image of us all being a sort of Noah's Ark for so many things, for memories, for stories, for mythology, and also for animals and figures which are shape-shifting across history, and that you seem to bring out a lot. So just to cross one book with another, and then I'm done with books, I promise. There is this book by James Hillman, who is writer and also a Jungian analyst, but I've always liked his writing. So this is how I got into him, which is called Animal Presences. And he uses a very similar image of the fact that we have a Noah's Ark. And there is a quote in here about us being full of hordes of sheep and goats and birds and the sky, and understand that you're also another world, and sort of on small scale, and that in you have the sun, the moon, and the stars. And this is from a philosopher from the 3rd century. So I found all this world inside your work, and so I'll just go to this image, which of course it's part of the exhibition you find downstairs. There's on one side Pazuzu, which is that Assyrian divinity, and on the others there's an angel. So maybe you would like to share some words about these two creatures and where they come flying to you.
Well, the Assyrian Pazuzu, the angel of wind, actually I saw it in a book of Assyrian archaeology, and I tried to absolutely make it as it was. Whereas the angel on the right comes only from my imagination. It's very rare. I mean, I'm very, of course, influenced by mythology and archaeology and all the myths and history that are in our region, Syria, Mesopotamia. But I mean, all these creatures come to mind when I work. It's not that I look at the artifacts and I copy them. Sometimes it happens with this little creature, because when I saw it, I was so, it was so beautiful actually. And I didn't know it existed. So you read a lot, but you don't know everything. But what Khaled said, I mean, Khaled is a poet from Tunisia. He is so perceptive because he wrote this text only after seeing 2 works that I had done, which was Adam and Eve. Of course, they were from they were the first things I ever made, Adam and Eve. And he said immediately that it's as if I was going to embark on bringing back to life all those people from ancient times. So Noah's Ark not only has all the people inside, but it has preserved them for future history. And this is actually what I would like to do, that people rediscover all this history.
It's also super fascinating, as I was rereading about Noah's Ark, that in the Bible it says that it's all black, outside and inside. So this idea of being inside of a sort of huge pitch black kind of cave or situation where things will emerge from again. And also Adam and Eve sort of bring things out of darkness and start naming everything and sort of bringing out different images and categories, and then the names start then. So was it more or less the same process that all these figures came out of the
That's right.
dark
It's like a
and you started
procession.
naming them? So.
Well, it's a procession of all these people. Again, about Noah's Ark, there is a place in Lebanon where there is a forest of old olive trees. They say that these olive trees are, so old that actually the bird that came from Noah's Ark to bring the olive tree to show Noah that the water has the seed that he had taken from that forest. So you see, Lebanon is still very mythical. They of course, they believe.
Mm-hmm.
Myth in our countries is very much alive. And they don't believe it literally, but they do believe it. And this is also this ambivalent. When you work, you know that these people exist, but they also don't exist. So you can.
Which, I mean,
They make you think. Actually, they come to make you think and rediscover thinking and what you have in your mind.
I will just quickly show a couple of recent exhibitions where those sort of winged creatures had found their way into Simone's sculpture. This was Garden of Memory, which was held at the Musée Saint-Laurent in Marrakech in 2018. And of course, the two figures, possibly, well, we don't know whether it's an Adam and Eve, but there's
No, it's
definitely
not
an
this
encounter.
time. No, that is not Adam and Eve.
But
No, actually, they represent the moment where two people meet. And you have one person, if you could, do you have another shot of the person?
I have one in Venice where the installation was.
Well, anyway, one of the two characters has an arm like this. So he is welcoming the other person. And this moment of meeting is a very important moment in everybody's life. You know, you live 70, 90 years and you don't remember anything, but you remember exactly the moment you have met the person that you love. And they will, all of us. And so in that thing, I try to express a moment in comparison with the movement of the angels that are going by in the sky, like clouds. And so it's, you know, like pull and push in a painting when you want to have a tension. And this tension about a moment that is, you know, has been fixed, and then the passage of time. This is what this was all about.
When we discussed about this previously.
Because these angels, you know, angels, they exist in every culture, in every society. They started you know, from the beginning of history, and they are. We used to see them more in the old days, but I'm sure they're still running around.
It's also the possibility of describing the movement by
to really show the movement by making these angels have a Sumerian kind of dress. You know, the Oran, they have a little skirt with, how do you say, des volants.
Volant.
Des volants. And so,
because they fly.
so they
Volant.
fly, and the wind goes through their skirts and pushes them around. And so I try to be able to express the movement of the wind and of what, as I said, the time. And there are 5 of them. They're all different, but they're big. They're like, each one is a 1 meter high, long.
Yes, which gives me an excuse to ask you something about the techniques, because some of the works you presented also here are amazing in terms of their making. Because of their size, it's very hard to use that material and put it in the kiln and produce it at that. So maybe you would like to say something about
I worked in a pottery place in Marrakech to do that for the museum. I went to Marrakech 5 times. Each time I spent a week. And of course, these potters who are traditional and do only vessels, but they know everything. I mean, they know pottery, they know clay, they know. And they were very so respectful. They didn't ask a single question. But then they were able to really help firing, and then we looked for the, because usually they don't know how to glaze, they don't use glaze, but we found them, the colors together. I wanted this Celadon color because it's immaterial, and they were fantastic, wonderful people. But of course, I would not have been able to carry all these things to the kiln and take them out. So you need help.
How do you usually work? Do you work from home? Do you go?
I work very fast, actually, and I try to work every day as much as I can. Like in this circumstance, it was perfect because I was there just to work, and these people helped. It was a beautiful garden. How do I work? I take a block of clay, and when you need it, something happens. You know, the clay talks to you. You start making somebody.
But I think also it started talking to you at a given time in your life. It's not that
Yeah,
it was talking to you before. It happened after you moved to the US.
yes, because when I started painting, there was no real opportunity to work with clay in Lebanon. Although after I met a very good potter who worked in Lebanon, she had been trained in Denmark, and she was wonderful. But it kind of was for me like a very far domain that I will not get into that domain. But little by little, working in painting, I started doing assemblage, collage, going into 3 dimensions. And then when I stopped painting for a long time and went to the US, it was like an unsaid history that I was going to go back and do clay. It was like nobody had said it, but that was what was going to happen, and it did.
This is an image of another recent exhibition, Works and Days, after Le opere e giorni. I remember it's in Italian because I studied classical studies, but of course it's a poem from the very early stages of the Greek great civilization, and it's all about working also every day, but also working, I mean, on the land, literally plowing and knowing the rhythms of nature. So it was a very beautiful
I certainly
title,
wanted
but
to have this reference to Hesiod as a respect for the land, a respect for the everyday work, and this constant, it's amazing what happens when when you don't work. It's as if you forget everything, and you have to always talk to this material. And one idea brings the other idea. Oh, I'm going to do Ishtar, then Ishtar brings another god and another, and then, it's so interesting to discover actually what you're thinking. Working with clay or writing, it's the same thing. You discover what you think because you don't know it. If you're sitting like this, you don't know what you are thinking. The minute it's embodied in something objective, like a pencil and a paper or a piece of clay, then it comes out. And in this cluster of people, there are many different things, like terracotta construction, which to me looked like something in Morocco. Then you have the 2 persons together, which come from an Arabic epic that I have been reading called Zat al-Himma. then the warriors, and then the central figure, it's not a figure, it's like a stele. It really is, there's one very close to it in the Louvre, which is 3000 BC, that I had never seen before. So it's a whole mix.
Which is, this really happened. I have to be honest. I had put together the image. This is also from the PS1, the one on top with that beautiful lion and the other headless but winged creature. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I would like to ask Simone about this lion man figure, which is considered one of the oldest existing sculptures. And then I came here and totally forgot that you had one in the middle of your collage, homage to Franz Marc,
Yeah.
which is one of the works on show. So I thought, oh,
That's
there we go.
amazing.
I mean, this presence of animals and images that really travel across time and space, and they come back. I mean, in
Yes.
that case, it's a collage, so you're literally taking the image. In some other occasions, you're shaping the image, but it's as if you're making room for all those presences to...
Well, the lion is there are many lions in Mesopotamia that always come. So it's an image that is always present. The lion is a very important animal in Arabic poetry. They have more than 300 names for the lion. It's all kinds of lions. If he's white, if he's old, if he's young, if he's light. I mean, at least 300 names. So it's a very important symbol in the psyche. And it's a prehistoric lion. There was a standing one that I used in my collage. And actually, someone told me it's as if you had made it. So it's, yeah,
That's what I thought about bringing over for you.
Yeah.
And then I found it in the collage, which was perfect. But it's 40,000 years old. I mean, it's
Well, I'm very, very old. That's you have the proof. And then the centaur is another image that comes to my mind a lot. The centaur is an animal. Of course, they say it has never existed, but it also is a very important idea. Half a man, half a horse, looking for the sky.
yeah. I also quickly brought a couple of other creatures. I mean, one downstairs, the other I can't recall, but you make room for many of these.
Yes, well, animals, I think we don't see them enough anymore in our modern world. And I think science has gone completely astray. Instead of learning from the animals, or instead of looking at them, they have destroyed them. And or they use them in laboratories. It's absolutely horrifying. Whereas they have such wisdom and science for living that we should look at. So,
Which is also, I mean, part of this book. It's really also about how they come back to haunt us somehow. We are so afraid of animals in so many ways. When they appear in dreams, they're often terrifying, or they become our own ways to understand certain things we are unable to tell ourselves in a different way. So we have to go
well, we have
through.
lost the understanding, and we can communicate with any animal, not only dogs and cats.
So I will just quickly move to something else. Well, everything is really closely related, so it's impossible because, I mean, also in this image there are animals. But this is also one of the collages on show downstairs. And this is about, oh yeah, sure. It's about Syria, although it's an older map, but on one side, as one can see, there's a small things with a little bit of scotch tape, and it's a present map of what used to be the ISIS state. And of course, I mean, the old geography of the area and what used to be greater Syria and Lebanon, and it's an entire area of constant wars and conflicts and all throughout the 20th century and even before. I mean, of course, it's as if it constantly come back to haunt, I mean, everybody in terms of what is unresolved. So in your work, there are also often references to something which is very present. So for instance, also this piece is called Weapons of Mass Destruction. So I just wanted you to ask, I just wanted to ask you to comment a bit on this. I mean, of course, it's a very loaded title, and we know why that expression has been used recently, and so forth.
Well, anyway, my work, even if I'm working on archetypes like Gilgamesh or Enkidu or Ishtar or Apollo, they really, for me, are to be used in the present. I'm not looking at them as old artifacts or old myths. I want them to be with us today. And if it gave me this form of the erect man. Man is to be standing up, and a man is a warrior by nature. And this is where history and myth go together. So I feel my work is always about history today. It's not about history 3,000 years ago. And when I used the map for Syria, I was showing that the idea of cutting up Syria has started since the beginning of the coming of the French to Syria. And this map shows how they wanted to have cut it in 5 pieces. And I'm saying that what's going on today is the same thing. And they wanted to do, I don't know who, the little red map with the red chunk of land was to be in ISIS little territory within Syria. So I wanted to show that it's an ongoing thing. It's not a map from 100 years ago. And Palmyra, I did Palmyra. Everything here is Palmyra and Syria. The 2 maps in the bottom are also other maps by the French in their history books that were proposing other cuts than the big one. So they always were thinking, how can we cut from here and here and here? So, well, that's it. And the weapons of mass destruction, it was irresistible to make a little bit of sticks that are harmless, have no harm, and I call them weapons of mass destruction because they were never found.
Yeah. Sorry, this I couldn't resist. When I saw the little ladder, it really made me think about the famous facade of the church of Santo Sepolcro in Jerusalem, which has this ladder, which has been left there since 18th century, because when the status quo was signed in between the different occupants of the church, everything that was in a given place had to stay in that place. And maybe it's a legend, but we all love legends. So since then, that ladder is unmovable. So it's a tiny wooden ladder that's left there.
That's what it is then, absolutely.
So I don't know about the genesis of your ladder, but it brought out that procession of images in me when I watched it.
That's great. No, I like to make ladders because it's an important object in a house. Also, my mother fell from a ladder. And
Oh, sorry.
no, it's not. She just, I mean, she would. So it is an important thing. But I like to put a ladder. I made very I mean, all my work is like, I made a house that looked very old. And actually, you always had a ladder to go on the roof. So it was, every house had a ladder, no? Well, that's it.
Also, I think Jacob's ladder, which is full of
It's a
angels.
wonderful thing, yeah. A ladder to go up to the sky.
And so, if you allow me, I put together other two images. So, just to bring us to, well, this is beautiful. Or just, I think they're titled Walls. And thankfully, they're not locked up walls. They let things move. But again, since I was recently in Beirut, I couldn't help thinking about that building, which is left there since the war, as in many other parts of the city. So where the destruction and the recent destruction and the relation we have, I mean, when we see architecture wounded by it's such a strong image somehow. I mean, it's as if we are unable to represent destruction. Maybe architecture helps. I mean, when we need to give it a shape, or I don't know, it's recorded. So is there any relation in between your pierced architecture and the experience of seeing, I mean, a city?
Well, there were so many walls. First, I'm sure when I did those two walls, I was thinking of the walls in Palestine for sure. But I don't know why I made these holes. You could go through. It's a wishful thinking. But and the towers are supposedly the towers where the soldiers stand, or the snipers. And so we had also tons of snipers during the civil war in Lebanon. And then in small, it depicted all these ideas. And then, of course, all this destruction that's everywhere.
But just going back to Beirut on a different story. This is a recent exhibition. It's actually still open, I think,
Yes,
until
it's
the
still
beginning
open,
of March. So if anybody gets a chance, it's really interesting. It's called At the Still Point of the Turning World, There is the Dance, which is also a beautiful title. And it's held at Sursock Museum, where you also had, well, there are pieces by you and also Etel in the exhibition. This is one of them. And as I was, well, unaware of a number of circumstances, but it's very fascinating how somehow it reconstructs the presence of a number of artists, and also many women artists working together and publishing and having spaces and making room for themselves somehow. So I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a bit about, well, more or less the landscape which is brought into the exhibition is around the 60s and 70s, because then, I mean, you left Lebanon by the end of the 70s. So maybe if you'd like to share with us something about that period and how it was to live there.
Well, all the while until the break of the civil war in Lebanon, there was a fantastically vibrant and exciting artistic scene. And well, I saw the first gallery. There was only one gallery called Gallery One. And before that, people exhibited in hotels, even in a big room. For instance, there was a nice newspaper, French newspaper, L'Orient. They had a room where you could exhibit, and artists were really happy to exhibit there. So there was no galleries until this Gallery One. And then it suddenly, took off. There was very many galleries, and we had 3, 4 openings a day to go every night to openings. There were wonderful artists all over, and a lot of them women, for
But
sure.
was it mostly painters?
Mostly
Or
painters, but there were a few sculptors. There was a family of sculptors. There were 3 brothers, and the Basbous, they lived outside Beirut, and they made their houses a museum. You could now go and visit. And they were really the sculptors. But all of them did some sculpture. Some painters like Arif Reyes, even Shafi Aboud, they did both.
was in a modernist tradition of
Yes,
painting,
very
abstract
modern, yes.
mostly, or also because I
No, I
think
don't
one.
think nobody looked to the past. They were really happy to have gone to Italy or Paris to do Beaux-Arts in Europe. It was in the style, in the international style of painting. It was not something that was from the place. So, but in Iraq more. In Iraq, history was more into the psyche of the artists because it's a bigger country. The history is there. It's really important, and they had their own schools. Of course, we had a school too. No, but it was really fascinating how it sprang up very quickly and very intensely. And Carla Schab, who did this exhibit, spent 2 years rehearsing and, I mean, not rehearsing, researching.
Yes.
Researching the history, and she did a wonderful job. And the day the exhibit opened, in the night, the revolution started. So
Yeah, I was there.
you were there, yeah.
And you too.
I was there.
We
but
didn't meet. But yeah, it was a very extraordinary situation. But at the same time, I think it's really one of, to me, the most fascinating movements to witness all throughout different countries and attitudes, but how modernism is being rewritten and constantly re-looked at. I mean, if one thinks about an exhibition like Post-War, curated by Okuyan Wizard, I mean, at the Haus der Kunst, but just an example, but how there has been so many modernities, and it's now impossible to talk about one
That's true.
version of modernity or what it is to, what modern art is. There are modern arts in different geographies and ways of looking at things. I mean, this is an abstract painting that you're doing at that stage, because I think it's from 1970. And
No, you're right. Every country brings its own sensibility. I mean, even in Europe, you have Impressionism in every European country, but the one that was made in France is not like the one made in the northern countries or in England. It's normal.
yeah, it's thankfully a sort
The
of...
weather goes into it, everything goes into it.
In that exhibition, there is a painting that I absolutely loved. This is from Huguette Callan, and I think it's also it's a self-portrait, but from 1973, which is quite close in time. And I think it's quite extraordinary the way she decided to portrait herself as a sort of an endless map of flesh. But in the end, there's a little corner which tells you that's actually a body. And I think you also knew each other through family. I remember one of her relatives being your teacher, a French teacher, or no? Then I remember it incorrectly, but apologies
No,
about
I
that.
knew her because she was. I knew her, and she was a cousin of my cousin. She was older than me, but at one point we were close, and she was great fun. She was a very interesting woman because she really decided to have a free life. Coming from a marriage, it's much more difficult to leave a husband and children than when you are, a young woman. And she was terrific. No, she learned with Helen Kha. She went to school, to the American University, and studied with Helen Kha. And
Helen Kha is one of the main figures whose work has been reconstructed by the exhibition we were talking about before at Sursok.
And they were very close, very close.
But I think it says also a lot about, one represents one body as boundless.
Her work was very sexual. I mean, it's terribly sexual and very daring. So.
And of course, I mean, this is your self-portrait.
That's mine.
Apologies about the picture. I took it yesterday, so there are all the reflections in the mirror. It's not a professional one. It's a personal snapshot. But I was also curious about, I mean, why choosing that angle and why presenting a self-portrait in this version? I mean, because there's also another self-portrait in the exhibition, which is a film. But in this case, I mean, it's as if you're emerging to.
It's an accident. It's a chance. Art is a lot about chance. You do something, and you like the result, and you keep it away. But it doesn't mean you made it on purpose.
Okay, and this is, of course, one image.
Yeah, this I did on purpose.
This was very much done on purpose, although it took a while to become a film.
Well, because...
Would you like to tell a bit the story of this piece, which is amazing?
Well, as I say in the film, I had gone to New York and I had seen an exhibit on self-portraits. And of course, there were all the great self-portraits of history with Van Gogh and Rembrandt and And then the young artists had presented photographs. And I said to myself, well, why not a film? So I went back to this photographer who lived in Paris then. I had met him in Beirut. He lived in Paris. And I said, you always wanted to do a lot of photographs with me. Would you like to do a movie? He said yes. So he brought a friend of his, and we bought the video machines, especially one big video machine to do the editing. It was at the beginning of the video. It was 1972. There was not much, and they were interested in the process also. So I produced the film. They came to Beirut. They stayed in my studio, and we filmed the whole night, myself, and then my family. Each one has a interview, and then they edited the film, but they didn't. I was not happy with the edition, and they were didn't get on anymore together, and they didn't want to finish the editing. And the film, because I didn't like it as the way it was, slept for 40 years in my suitcase, in my drawer. Until one day, a friend of mine, my sister came to see me. There was this filmmaker, and my sister said, whatever happened to this movie? And my filmmaker friend said, what movie? Well, she was interested. And we told her the story, so she took all the tapes, first to see if there was anything on it after 40 years. And then she mastered it. And then we It slept another year. And then until this other friend, Eugenie, edited Etel's movie for Documenta. And then she said, I'd like to edit your movie. And we put her in a room with all the tapes and the computer, and she edited the film. But I could not look at it for nothing.
Because this is a sort of an inescapable question, but how was it to meet yourself?
Oh, horrible.
Sort of 40 years later.
It's boring like hell. I don't like to look. The only thing I liked when I saw the movie was that I saw my mother. That was a very good, pleasure to see her. Other than that, no. No, I'm not.
You look like a riot girl in this film a lot. Sort of, you look like a very strong, interesting, sort of a fighter. But yeah, I think you were in the process of becoming, I don't know,
Well,
also.
Well, by then I had already found myself, if you want. I was, I was painting. I was living in my studio. I had already, how shall I say, solved a lot of problems. I mean, you don't know exactly what you want to do when you are 18, especially in Lebanon, and so it took some time, and then, I had found myself, if you want. Why did I do this movie?
Well, we're grateful anyway. So it's a pleasure to meet you also in this version. And okay, sort of, well, not so
it was
far.
Fun. It was fun.
In time, at least, time-wise, this is the first man on the moon.
Yes.
So it's also the end of the 60s. It's an extraordinary image. And it's also funny because this year, because of the anniversary, we all went back through the same process somehow of re-seeing all those images. And I was sure I remembered it from being a mini child, but then I'm not quite sure. It's this sort of image which kind of is planted in your imagination, and you never know exactly when you accessed it. But I am introducing this beautiful sculpture also because the press...
The moon landing was an extraordinary thing. And especially for us, Etel and I called the press post-Apollo, after the Apollo program that took man on the moon. I thought it was really a new era. We were going to travel through the galaxies and the stars. I mean, it's wonderful. I remember when I was in London, actually, when the moon landing was happening. We were in a bar, and we saw it on TV. And then I went out of the bar, and the moon was there. I said, oh, here they are. It was a strange feeling.
Well, and there you are. Fix your gaze on Saturn's rings. I mean, it all comes back. But could you say something more about the birth of post-Apollo press? And
about the press?
Yes. Why did you decide to start publishing books? Because in the exhibition, there's also beautiful books.
Well, because when I left Beirut and I put all my paintings and drawings in store, I packed everything, and it was a traumatic experience, and there was the war. And so I went to America. I knew I didn't want to paint. That was something that was like a very, something I didn't want anymore. And it took a year. And then after a year, I just had the idea of doing one chapbook first. And we have a saying in Arabic, say the church that is close to you does not cure you. And I said, why is this? Maybe it should cure you. So I was living with a woman who was a poet, and I said, well, I can publish this poet. So I published the first poem as a gift for Ethel, actually. And she was sick, and I did this first chapbook from A to Z. And while I was doing it, a friend of mine said she would like to translate Cette Marie Rose, which Ethel had written in French. I said, if you translate it, I will publish it. And then in 3 months, I had a publishing house, because when you have, from the first book, I wanted to have a name, to have ISBN, to have Library of Congress. And when you have a novel, it's not a chapbook. You want the novel to work, to sell. And it needs to a lot of work for that. And then for them to be able to live, you have to produce another book every year. So I started publishing, and I didn't stop. It's such a wonderful job, actually. It's great.
But you also translated. You
I translated,
did a lot of work in
yeah,
translations.
I translated the book on Rumi, which had been written by a friend of mine also, and I said, well, it would do well. It's in America. I translated it from the French. And that book also, like Cette Marie Rose, put us in contact with the Middle East studies, which in America is very big. And I met all the scholars, the professors of Islamic studies. I had wonderful friends all over, and they all started to teach Cette Marie Rose. Mm-hmm. And it was actually what I did, which unconsciously to do this publishing house, put me in contact with the real life in America. Instead of painting away in your own studio, not meeting anybody, mm-hmm. I was in contact with all the poets, the writers, the professors. It was a wonderful life.
I think also.
And then when I felt that it was okay, I went back to doing sculpture, clay sculpture. But it was always a bit in the back burner, because when you do something for other people, it takes precedence. My publishing house was first, and my sculpture was second.
Is it true that also the women's movement was important in the beginning to diffuse the books?
They embraced Cette Marie Rose. They completely, how shall I say, they identified with a woman who had been killed for her thinking. And so they had when there were feminist bookstores, and when we went to feminist bookstores, all the women came and told their own story. To them was completely the same. Some people were raped by their fathers, some people were in their living room, a man comes through the window, or all these feminist stories, they were completely made one with Marie Rose. So it was a timely book. She had written a book in which people could identify all over the world. Well, for me, it was not, because it happened in Lebanon, I saw it more as a Lebanese political novel, but it had more than that.
Mm-hmm. I have one extra image, which is the last image I had put together. I really like that. There are so many beautiful titles in this story. This is How to Reappear Through the Quivering Leaves of Independent Publishing. And this is you at Beirut Art Center, again, very recently. And that was also an important survey of independent publishing and reconstructing an entire history. So I think in the first pages is Ethel Adnan. and again, but also all the working process, because I mean, you both.
Yeah, I mean, these are two curators, two women curators who are wonder. They did this exhibit on many different publishing houses, but I was the biggest one, and I wrote the history of the press, and I gave a talk, but. I said, why did you wait so long to come? Because I have given all my archives to the Berkeley University. I still have, but I mean, really. But it's
I
things
don't know.
take time, I guess.
Maybe it's still the guerrilla girls. I mean, one of the great advantages of being a woman artist is that you can become really famous when you're 80. No, I was just kidding, of course. But how important is for you to see this story being kind of reappearing and re-emerging and being retold again?
No, it's wonderful. I mean, you know, I did that for so long. I cannot. It's part of my life. It's my life.
Well, I think we've been talking for about 1 hour.
Wow. I hope they're not too
so
bored.
maybe there are. I hope not. I doubt it, since you're speaking. So I really doubt it. Maybe there are some questions, or I don't know how you usually, but you are.
Yes, no, we have time for if there's a couple of questions from anyone.
When I'm going to exhibitions, most of the times I'm not, before an exhibition, I don't like to know about the artist. So I challenge myself somehow. Sorry? Yeah. When yesterday I came to your exhibition, so as soon as I came, it's like, oh, that's artist from Middle East, because I'm from Middle East myself. So as I understand, you left Beirut in 1980. So when I say your works is you holding very strongly on your roots. So my question is like, after you moved, because you moved into San Francisco, if I understand right. So most of the artists, when they left their country, they are getting somehow lost in the beginning or all the way. So I wonder if have you experienced this getting lost, or have you had this period, or what made you to be very like I can see very strong, like you're a artist from Middle East, and you, as I said, yeah, you hold it very strong on your roots, and it's so beautiful. So I just wonder if you had this period.
Yeah, well, you know, when I first went to Europe as a student, I experienced what we are talking about. It was very difficult to adapt and to go to the Sorbonne and study and have completely different hours and wake up when it's dark in the morning and it was so cold. It was very difficult. But when I went to the US, I was helped because I went with my friend, my partner, Etal Adnan, and she had been living in California for 20 years before. And so she had tons of friends and a milieu, and it was easier. But it still was difficult. That's why it took a year before I could even find a place for myself, you know, and I didn't want to paint, and I didn't know what to do. But I waited, and, you know, we were so, I mean, the sorrow of what was going on in Lebanon took all our time, you know, all our thinking. I mean, there was no also time to think about something else. But yes, I think the publishing came as something that I had to do. like put these books out was an essential thing. And the people in America were very nice. I mean, they always, when I said I'm coming from Lebanon, oh, it's wonderful that you are now out of there, that you have left. They were very welcoming, maybe more than somewhere else, I don't know. But it was, they were not hostile, you know. You are from Egypt?
No, I'm from Iran.
Oh.
Any other questions? No, if not, that it's probably a chance to talk to Simone and Barbara also after. And so then I will just thank you both so much for a
Thank you.
very enlightful conversation. Thank you all for coming. That's it.
Yes.